August of 1981. The Pattee was running low and clear. I was 19 years old and I had a $5 bill in my pocket that my mother had given me for gas, and I had spent 2 of it on a tin of Berkeley salmon eggs at the hardware store in Strasburg. I was sitting in the bed of my father's pickup at 4:30 in the morning, watching the fog come off the creek, and I was already convinced the salmon eggs were a waste of $2 because the catfish hadn't touched them in 3 weeks and I didn't know why. I was about to find out why from a man named Henry Fisher, who lived on a quarter-acre lot outside Paradise, Pennsylvania, and who had not bought a single jar, can, tin, or packet of commercial bait since the summer of 1941. He was 68 years old that August. He'd been keeping a small back pond and fishing the Pattee since he was old enough to walk a plank. And what he pulled out of his springhouse that morning in a clouded glass mason jar with a tin lid rusted at the rim was the answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking yet. The jar was about the size of a quart of preserves. Inside it was a coarse cream-colored powder, almost the color of cornmeal but finer, and it smelled. I'll come back to the smell. The label on the jar was handwritten in pencil, and it said just 1837. He saw me looking at it, and he didn't explain. He just walked past me toward his truck and said, "Get in, we're going to the bend below the railroad bridge." That jar is what I want to tell you about tonight, because that powder and the plant it came from and the year on that label, 1837, turned out to be a knot of Lancaster County history that I have spent the better part of 40 years pulling apart. And the more I pulled at it, the more I understood why Henry Fisher had not, in 40 years on this earth as a grown man, walked into a tackle store and put down money for what was on the shelf. The plant has a Latin name, Acorus calamus. The English name most people know is sweetflag. Out here in Lancaster County, the old-timers called it calamus root, or sometimes just the bogreed, and it grew thick along the wet edges of the Conestoga and along the marshy run that feeds into the lower Pattee below Paradise. It still grows there. You can walk out today and find it if you know what you're looking for. The leaves are flat and sword-shaped, about 3 feet tall, and they have a sharp citrusy smell when you crush them. The root is what mattered to Henry. He'd dig it in late October when the leaves had yellowed and the rhizome had pulled its sugars down for winter, and he'd wash it, and he'd slice it into rounds about the thickness of a quarter, and he'd lay it on a flat screen in the springhouse loft to dry for 6 weeks. Then he'd grind it in a hand-cranked coffee mill his grandfather had brought from Württemberg in 1879. The powder went into the mason jar. The jar went on the second shelf of the springhouse behind the cider press, and every spring he had a year's supply of bait amendment for less than what I had just spent on the tin of Berkeley salmon eggs. He told me that morning, as we drove down toward the railroad bridge, that his grandfather had taught him this, and his grandfather had learned it from a German immigrant pond keeper named Heinrich Stoltzfus, who came over in 1837, which is why the jar said 1837. That date wasn't when the bait was made. It was the year the recipe walked across the Atlantic and arrived in Lancaster County in a wooden chest, written in pencil on the inside of the lid, in Old High German. He said all of this in the cab of the truck the way another man would tell you what he had for breakfast. Flat, plain. He wasn't selling me anything. He was just answering the question he'd seen on my face when I looked at the jar. We pulled off at the bend below the railroad bridge and walked down through the wet grass to a flat shelf of mud where the creek made a slow eddy. The water there was the color of strong tea. Henry sat on his haunches the way old men do, balanced on his heels with his elbows on his knees, and he took the jar out of his jacket pocket. He took a clean cotton handkerchief out of his other pocket. He spread the handkerchief flat on a piece of slate, and then he did something I will remember for the rest of my life. He took 2 heaping tablespoons of that calamus powder out of the jar with a wooden spoon. He poured it onto the handkerchief. He added 1 tablespoon of what he later told me was rendered chicken fat from the kitchen, soft but not melted. He added a half teaspoon of cane molasses from a small brown bottle. He folded the handkerchief into a tight little bundle about the size of a walnut and he tied it shut with a length of cotton butcher's twine. The whole bundle he then took, and he pinned it to the leader of his fishing line about 8 inches above, a plain bronze long shank hook with a hand-tied gob of nightcrawler on it. And then he cast the whole rig into the eddy and handed me the rod and said, "Count to 40. I counted to 40. At 36, the rod tip pulled down so hard I almost dropped it into the creek. 4-pound channel cat, then a 6-pounder, then another 4. In 45 minutes, we had 11 channel catfish on the bank, all of them between 4 and 7 pounds, and the only thing that had changed about my fishing in 3 weeks was the cotton handkerchief tied to the leader. Henry said almost nothing the entire time. He just watched the water, and every 15 minutes or so he'd untie the bundle, wring out a little water from it back into the creek so the scent kept seeping, and repin it to the leader. The jar in his pocket had not gotten any lighter. He had used, by my rough count, less than half an ounce of that powder. Less than half an ounce. For 11 catfish. I drove home that afternoon with my father's pickup smelling like calamus and creek water and channel catfish, and I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before I went inside, just trying to add up in my head what I had seen. $2 of salmon eggs had caught me 0 fish in 3 weeks. A handful of dried root from a plant growing wild on the creek bank had caught me 11 fish in 45 minutes. The plant cost nothing. The chicken fat was a kitchen scrap. The molasses was a half teaspoon. The whole bait, if you costed it out, was somewhere around 2 cents per outing in $1981, maybe 8 cents today. I tried it myself the next Saturday. I had watched Henry. I thought I had it. I dug a calamus root from the marsh below the springhouse. I sliced it. I dried it for 6 weeks on a screen in my mother's attic because we didn't have a springhouse loft. And on a clear Sunday morning in October, I went out to the back pond with my own jar of powder and my own handkerchief and my own chicken fat and molasses. I caught nothing. 2.5 hours. Not a tap. I went back to Henry on Monday afternoon, ready to tell him the method was broken, that something didn't transfer, that maybe it only worked for him and not for me. He let me talk. Then he asked me 3 questions. How long had I dried the root? What was the water temperature when I fished? And had I used the young root or the old root? I had used the young root, harvested in summer, not dried long enough. And I had fished in water that was probably above 78 degrees because the back pond hadn't turned over yet and the surface layer was still warm. He told me honest answer. 3 things had to be right. The root had to be at least 2 years old in the ground, which meant you had to know which patches to harvest from and which to leave alone. It had to dry for at least 6 weeks at cool temperatures, between 40 and 55 degrees. Because the volatile oils in the root oxidize and lose their attractant quality if you dry them in summer heat. And the water had to be below 72 degrees, because above that temperature, the catfish move to deeper water and the scent doesn't diffuse the same way. He said this won't work for bass. Bass don't have the same olfactory architecture, the same nose for it. And you'll spend a Saturday on a base pond with calamus powder and learn nothing. It works for channel catfish. It works for carp. It works for bullhead. It does not work for largemouth, and I want you to know that before you waste a season on it. That was the honesty I needed. I went back out the following October, after a proper 6-week dry on the back porch in cold weather, with a piece of root I had let sit 2 seasons in the ground, and I caught 9 catfish in an afternoon. I have used some version of that bait, on and off, for 43 years. I have never bought a tin of Berkeley salmon eggs since. Henry Fisher died in 2004. He was 91. His son sold the lot in Paradise and the springhouse was torn down in 2007. The mason jar with the pencil label that said 1837, I do not know what happened to it. I think it ended up at an auction barn outside Lidditz with a lot of his other kitchen things, and somebody bought it for 50 cents because they liked the look of it and they probably threw the powder away thinking it was old. The flour. What I kept was the method, and what I have spent 40 years doing, on and off, is trying to figure out why that method existed in 1837 and why nobody under the age of 70 in this county seems to know about it today. The short answer is what happened in the 1930s. Up until about 1925, almost every serious freshwater fisherman east of the Mississippi made his own bait or got it from a neighbor who did. There were a handful of small bait shops, but they sold worms, minnows, and pork rind, and that was about it. The recipes for scented amendments, the dough balls, the oils, the powdered root sweeteners, those lived in handwritten notebooks, kitchen cabinets, and springhouse shelves. They lived in the heads of men like Heinrich Stoltzfus and Henry Fisher's grandfather and the people they taught. Then James Hedden's company in Michigan got big. Creek Chub Bait Company in Indiana got big. Pfluger and Shakespeare got big. Uncle Josh started selling pork rind in jars out of Wisconsin in 1922. By 1936 and 1937, you could walk into any hardware store in Lancaster County and buy a jar of commercial scented bait dough for 15 cents. 15 cents in 1937 money was about $3 today. It wasn't cheap, but it was easy, and easy is what kills folk knowledge. I went and looked. Penn State Extension started its agricultural bulletin program in earnest in the 1920s. There are bulletins on poultry, on alfalfa, on tobacco, on dairy. I looked through the indexes of every Penn State Agricultural Extension bulletin published between 1920 and 1945 at the Pattee Library in University Park. There is exactly one short paragraph on calamus as a fish attractant. It is in a 1928 bulletin on Pennsylvania wetland plants, written for farmers, and it says, in essence, that local pond keepers in the southeast counties report using dried sweetflag root as a bait amendment for catfish. No recipe, no proportions. 3 sentences. After 1928, the references stop. By the late 1930s, the commercial bait industry had eaten the shelf space, and the bulletin writers had moved on. It wasn't banned in 1937. It was buried under 15-cent jars of commercial paste. Buried under the rise of Bass Pro's grandfather companies. Buried by the simple fact that a man with a sore back and a tackle store down the road would rather pay 15 cents than spend 6 weeks drying root on a screen. The science caught up later, quietly. Auburn University Fisheries program has been publishing on amino-acid attractants in catfish since the 1960s. There is a body of peer-reviewed work going back 50 years on how channel catfish olfactory receptors respond to specific compounds. Calamus root, Acorus calamus, contains a class of volatile oils that includes acerones and a small amount of methylisogenol. The acerones in particular have been documented in plant chemistry literature as attractants for certain cyprinid and ictulurid species, that is, carp and catfish. The FDA actually weighed in on calamus root in 1968, by the way, and this is the part I want you to hear carefully, because it sounds like a fishing-related ban and it isn't. The FDA reviewed calamus root and restricted its use as a food and beverage additive in 21 CFR 189.110 in 1968. The reason was a study on rats that suggested possible toxicity at very high doses when calamus was used as a flavoring in vermouth and bitters. The rule was about people eating it in cocktails. The rule said absolutely nothing about external use as a fish attractant on a handkerchief tied to a leader 8 inches above a hook, but the timing matters. By 1968, the commercial bait industry was already entrenched. The calamus knowledge was already mostly gone. The FDA rule, which did not address bait, became one more reason the few remaining pond keepers who still used the method kept it quiet. They didn't want to argue with anyone. Henry Fisher never argued with anyone. He just kept his mason jar on the second shelf behind the cider press, and he kept catching fish. I want to tell you what I changed over 40 years because Henry didn't get to see this, and I think he would have nodded at it. I added 1 tablespoon of dried garlic powder to every 12 ounces of calamus powder, not as a primary attractant. As a freshness marker, garlic oxidizes faster than calamus. So if my jar starts smelling more garlic than root, I know the jar is old. and the volatile oils in the calamus are gone, and I dump it and regrind. That tip is mine. Henry didn't do it. I also stopped using rendered chicken fat in summer because it goes rancid in the bundle within 45 minutes above 70 degrees. I switched to refined coconut oil, which holds up much better in heat and doesn't change the scent signature. That's mine too. The base recipe, calamus, fat, molasses, cotton handkerchief, 8 inches above the hook, is exactly what Henry showed me at the bend below the railroad bridge in August of 1981. 43 years on, the bones of it are his. The trimming around the edges is mine. And I want to be clear about something. Henry Fisher is the way I remember a few different old men in this county who all knew variations of the same thing. The composite is mine. The methods are real. Heinrich Stoltzfus, the German immigrant in 1837, is part of the family lore Henry told me, and part of the wider documented history of Pennsylvania Dutch settlement that brought European folk fishing knowledge to Lancaster County. I have not been able to find a written record of a Heinrich Stoltzfus specifically in 1837. The recipe traveling on the inside of a chest lid is the kind of story that gets passed down accurate in spirit and fuzzy in the details. I am giving you what Henry told me as he told it to me, and I am telling you that some of it I can verify and some of it I cannot. Before I let you go, I want to say one more thing. Calamus root grows in 26 of the lower 48 states. It is not endangered. In most states, it is considered a wetland plant of no special status. There are a handful of states, Massachusetts being one, where harvesting any wetland plant requires checking your local conservation district. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia. All clear for personal harvest from your own property or from public land where wild plant gathering is allowed. Check your state DNR before you go digging. Always check. I am not a lawyer. I am not a botanist. I am a man who fished a creek with an old man one August morning 43 years ago and never got over it. If this is the kind of thing you want more of old Lancaster County methods, the recipes the tackle industry filled in around with 15-cent jars in the 1930s, the springhouse and the mason jar, and the way men used to feed themselves from a quarter-acre pond, subscribe and stay with me. I've got a video coming up on Mose Byler's catfish liver line, which is the cold weather equivalent of what Henry showed me with calamus root, and it is one of the strangest and most effective things I have ever seen done on the Paquea in October. Tell me in the comments what your grandfather kept on the springhouse shelf, or the kitchen pantry, or the corner of the workbench that he used for bait and never explained. I want to hear it. I read every comment. Henry's gone, Eli Yoder's gone, the men who knew this are mostly gone, and the only way the methods stay alive is if the rest of us write them down where the next generation can find them. Out here in Lancaster County, the fog is coming up off the creek again, and I have a line to check before dark. I'll see you next time. The pond keeps teaching, and I keep learning. So do you.